How does Washington hang around as a big underdog on the road against Oregon? Well, this is how, and we're crossing it over.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time for a Locked On College crossover of Locked On Ducks and Locked On something else out there. Roman Tomashoff, Lars Hanson of Locked On Huskies joining me here. Thanks so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. That's the only reason that I wanted to host, because this is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Either way, your team every day. In this episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We will put each other metaphorically on the witness stand and ask the biggest questions that our teams have to answer going into this game. But speaking of FanDuel, Roman, it is Oregon minus 19.5. That's a big old fat number for a rivalry game, new coach and new roster or not. But when I think about how Washington keeps it closer than Oregon fans are comfortable with, I go to that Huskies defense. I think they have to play a quality football game or hope Oregon makes some of the mistakes they've made offensively in the last couple of weeks, because a shootout, I don't see this Washington offense with questions at quarterback as being capable of going toe-to-toe in the games we saw last year that were, in the mid to high 30s.
Spencer, I want to open this with a quote from one of the best musical artists on the planet, the one and only Kendrick Lamar, who taught him how to run a blitz. Steve did it. Where I've been so impressed with just some of the blitz packages that Washington has been able to.
I'll be honest, I don't know what song that's from.
Oh, that's disappointing. It's on GNX, the brand new album. Just fantastic album. Yeah, you definitely.
I'm listening to Billy Joel for the 800th time.
You shocker. We won't get into the Billy Joel concert you and I were able to attend this year. Shout out to you for that.
It was a great time. Anyway, back to football.
Yeah, football. That's why we're here. Steve Belichick's blitz packages have been so much fun to watch. Something Lars and I have discussed over on Locked On Huskies many a time this year, where it's been really inventive. There are so many different packages. Truly, we could spend a whole show just discussing the different combinations and the different ways that he's been able to utilize guys and just get the most out of them. But I'm going to focus on two for the point of time here, and that's Alphonso Tuputala and Voit Tanufi. He's done a really good job of moving these guys all over the formation and just finding ways to make them be really effective. And Spencer, to be honest, Dillon Gabriel's had a really great year. There's no denying that. But when he's been the least effective and when I've been least impressed with him this year is at points when he's handling the blitz. When he doesn't, there are times where it feels like he doesn't necessarily know what he's looking at. And that's something that Steve Belichick has been really, really good at all season long. So if Washington is going to find a way to keep it close, it's going to start with putting pressure on Dillon Gabriel, which is something they found a way to do where it hasn't necessarily always resulted in sacks. They found ways to certainly put pressure on quarterbacks and make their lives difficult.
Yeah, I think the chess match there is fascinating, because if you go to the Ohio State game, Dillon Gabriel was under pressure a couple times, but mostly wasn't, and he wasn't actually sacked that entire game. And with Tez Johnson back from injury this week, that's not a formula even this Washington secondary that's played really well this year is going to be able to find a lot of success with. If Ohio State can get torched, Washington can get torched if they're not able to pressure Dillon Gabriel. But I think that what Ohio State came with was, we're not going to blitz a bunch of extra guys. We trust our four up front to just generate pressure. But Lars, it sounds like from what Roman is saying, that's not how the Huskies are able to disrupt a quarterback.
They're not. And I mean, for me, it comes down to the linebackers. Like, the linebackers are going to win and lose this game because they're talking about three different types of guys. Roman mentioned one of them, and Alphonso Tuputala, kind of the X factor, does everything. Carson being the true middle linebacker. If you compare the game that Carson had against USC, which I know obviously Oregon much better offense than what USC
Carson
showed.
Bruner, for the Oregon fans out there that might not know the last names of certain Husky players.
Sorry, there we go. Yes, so Carson Bruner for people that don't root for UW. Good point, Spencer. And then Kamori House, the true freshman, the other linebacker that Washington has played basically the third most of the season. A different type of X factor, because obviously, as Roman knows, he's lined up more as an edge, but really just as well in coverage. I'm not saying he's better in coverage than he is as a blitzer, but those three are going to dictate everything, because Voit Tanufi, as much as I like him and all that, he'll have some success, but I would be surprised if he wins more battles and loses, especially against an offensive line like Oregon. So it's going to come from that second level in the defense. You're not going to bring, Cam Fabikilan in or somebody else in the secondary as a blitzer because it's already way too late. And we're talking about a secondary getting torched. It's only going to make things worse. So that's why the linebackers have to make a difference. And we saw that in a way against Penn State where they had some success and, the offense just couldn't do a single thing. So the only way that this is going to work is if all three of those guys have arguably their best game of the season. We've seen Carson Bruner's best game. We've seen Alfonso have several really good games. But for me, it's going to be all three of them collectively bringing it together in different ways against Oregon.
Roman, one thing I heard sticking with the schematic chess match between Steve Belichick and Oregon offensive coordinator Will Stein that I heard, I think during the UCLA game, is Belichick likes to run a lot of single high, which was a staple of the Patriots defense for a long time. They're running cover one or cover three, a lot of cover one. And then once they get down to the red zone, they'll shift to a too high look and change the coverages there. What is your confidence level in the Washington secondary to hold up man-to-man on the outside? Because Ohio State tried to take away the middle of the field, leave their corners alone on an island, and they got burned by Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's something I'm really curious about, where the biggest thing that you can say about Washington's secondary, especially the outside corners, where I like nickel corner Jordan Shaw a lot in some of these, short areas and what he's able to do in single coverage. But the biggest thing that I'm really curious about is what it's going to look like, because Ephesians Prysock and Thaddeus Dixon both love to just get up in receivers' faces and play press. They love to just try to knock guys off and not give them a free release, which I know Ohio State does as well. But the length that both those guys have on the outside is something I'm really curious about. And to be honest, Spencer, my confidence level, and I mean this all due respect to your question, my confidence level doesn't matter. Steve Belichick has 100% confidence in both those guys to do that. So we're going to see it a lot no matter what. I think they do have the ability to win some of those battles, but my question is, what's that going to look like, especially against a guy like Evan Stewart, who, as we know, is known for his route running and ability to create free releases off the line of scrimmage?
Yeah, I think he and Tez Johnson both excel in that area, and Tez has become more of a downfield threat this year, I think, than he was in past seasons with Bo Nix, not because of a philosophical change, but I think they just kind of opened him up a little bit more and said, let's push him down the field so that they can't just sit on the short routes. But I when I watch Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, what stands out the most, they have great hands, they're fast, they're explosive, but it's hard to jam them. It's really hard. And Will Stein also, and I think he did it more last year than he has this season, frankly, loves putting Tez Johnson in motion. And that makes it darn near impossible for him to get jammed off the line of scrimmage. They will stack guys a lot. They will motion to a stack. I think all of these things are going to be really fascinating to watch to see how it kind of plays out, particularly early in the game, and see what adjustments are required going either way. But Lars, I want you to go big picture for a moment. What is Washington feeling like as a fan base coming into this game?
I mean, I know it's not the ideal place they want to be, but win or lose, it doesn't matter. Nobody's expecting Washington to win this game. I mean, let's just be real about this. I don't think anybody, the point spread will tell you that. Nobody is expecting Washington to win this game. If it happens to be close, as Roman said on our show earlier this week, no moral victories, but you kind of take it. I mean, you just don't want it to be a 70-21 opposite end situation that you're in. And so for me, I think the Washington fans kind of know what to expect, and this is basically Washington's championship game this year. I know Jed said the bowl game is going to be like championship to Jed Fish is going to be the championship, game, whichever bowl game they go to. But let's be real, whatever bowl opponent they face will not be as good as Oregon. So this is the one game. If you're going to put everything into one game and worry about the transfer portal after this game, this is the weekend to do it. And crazier things have happened. I don't think they're going to win, but crazier things have happened.
I mean, Vanderbilt beat Alabama. Let's just sit in a world where that happens. I'm not going to rule out anything at this point, especially in a rivalry game. What questions does Washington have to answer, though, to hang around with the Ducks? That and the inverse of that as well is all coming up next. Right after we talk about FanDuel, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And if you want to bet this game, Oregon-Washington, whichever way you are feeling, take the points in a rivalry game, Oregon's a better team, whatever you believe, FanDuel's the place to get it done. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you're placing your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Whether that first bet's on this game or another game, you get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com, never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's answer the biggest questions that Washington has going into this game. Roman, I'll start with you for no reason other than Lars spoke last. For Washington offensively, this is an Oregon defense that has been the better, more consistent side of the ball for the Ducks this season. And heck, they were even great on special teams, aside from one missed block on a fake field goal against Wisconsin. But that was a defense first, special team second, offensively third, one football game. How is Washington going to try and move the ball against this Oregon defense?
Well, Spencer, there's a bigger question here. Who's going to start?
Who's going to move the ball?
We are still not 100% sure, as Lars and I discussed a little bit earlier this week. We think it might be Damon Williams, where he just injected some life into Washington in the second half. So let's operate under a world where that's the case, because that just seems to be where some of Jed's comments have led us to believe. Plus, the way he played in the second half is very, very hard to ignore. He moves the ball with speed, with things like the RPO, with the zone read. There are a whole bunch of different ways that Damon has shown that he can move the football. The question is, against a really stout Oregon defense, what's going to work? And I think it's going to start on the ground with a combination of the zone read between Damon Williams and Jonah Coleman, where Jonah is over 1,000 yards this year. Jonah has had a really, really good season. And the question is, if you're able to find a way to get the defense to collapse and maybe take some shots where you like Denzel Boston in those scenarios, you like Jeremiah Hunter, Giles Jackson, insert receiver here as you will. And the tight ends have been really solid too, and Kelechi Latu and Decker DeGraff. They're literally the only two healthy bodies in the room outside of Walk-On and Coots. But they've been really solid whenever they've been on the field. So my question is, are you going to find ways to get into advantageous situations, again, whether it be Damon Williams or Will Rogers, and find a way to take shots in one-on-one and trust your receivers to come down with the football, which they have all season long? The question has been, will it work on the road, which it has not yet this season.
Yeah, Washington yet to win a road game, 6-0 at home, 0-5 on the road. Lars, I don't know that I've ever seen that before. So if Jed Fish, and certainly he is not going to just throw in the towel and say, well, we have no chance of winning this game. Like, of course he's going to try to do that. Is Damon Williams the best choice to try to give Washington their first road win of the season? Last time they went away from home, it was a 35-6 beat down against Penn State. And yeah, the defense didn't necessarily play great. But as Roman said earlier, I felt like it was more about the offense's inability to keep up with Penn State in that one.
Yeah, and as somebody who made that trip to State College, lovely trip. But it kind of in point, Damon Williams came in the second half of that game and got them down to, I think, the 5-yard line or 3-yard line against Penn State twice and came away with 6 points total in the second half. So for me, it's a matter of, okay, is Oregon's defense that, in comparison to Penn State? They're pretty close. I mean, we'll find out on Saturday for sure.
I mean, I take Oregon's defense over Penn State's.
Exactly. So now, obviously, no. Kind of point of show. But with that being said,
it sounded like you were questioning that a moment ago.
Hey, we're the Husky guys. We have to, lean into rivalry week somehow.
Okay. Got it.
Well, and I'm on the weird triangle effect being over in Pullman. But with that being said, you would have to imagine that Jed learned some lessons. Damon learned some lessons from that game. Almost had a touchdown to Decker. You probably could think Jonah might get it on one of those 2 touchdowns on red zone drives. So there's 14 points right there. And all of a sudden, 35-6, 35-14 sounds a little bit better going into this game, at least a little bit. And for me, Damon also didn't play in the first half against Penn State for the first time since Eastern Michigan. So Jed was basically saying, okay, you know what? We're just going to roll with Will and see what happens. And you had a 10-minute drive on that first opening drive. Grady Gross bangs one off the right upright from 42 like he did in pregame, which I thought was hilarious. Actually practiced that in pregame and then banged it right off the same upright.
Practice makes perfect. You can't do it on the field till you do it on the practice field.
For real. And we don't get to see practice during the season. So whenever Jed says that Grady is making it a practice, we just take Jed at face value because it's what you got to do. But for me, Damon absolutely gives you the best opportunity to move the ball. I love Will. Will Rogers has been great this season, just in terms of what he's needed to be as that bridge gap. But we all knew going into this season and obviously 2025, Damon Williams Jr. is going to be the next quarterback at Washington. Does that get a running start this weekend? I think there's no other reason why not to. Like, what does Will do that gives you any semblance of hope when you need to create as much spark on offense as possible? It's a great safety net if Damon ends up throwing 3 picks in the first half and you just need somebody to come in and make it a respectable game at the end. But I don't even think Damon's done that, is able to do that, because Damon hasn't thrown a pick this season. He's only had 1 fumble, and that was against Eastern Michigan in week 2. So you talk about all the improvements that Damon has made. I think this is the perfect opportunity. Got the whiteout experience, so Austin's not going to be too big a stage for him. There's no reason to not go with anybody else but Damon.
Roman, we've talked about a couple questions that Washington has in this game. Arguably the biggest one, though, is whoever's playing quarterback, how are they going to protect him? This is an Oregon defensive line that is littered with NFL guys. You've got Jordan Birch, who I believe is going to be back, but when he's been out, Oregon's defensive line has been phenomenal this season. And Mateo Uyunglele is playing himself to be a first-round pick in the 2026 NFL draft. Derek Harmon might be the best interior D lineman Oregon's had since DeForest Buckner. Like, this defensive line is a unit I've hyped up for a really long time. They've lived up to the billing, arguably, and then some over the course of this year. How does that Washington offensive front match up?
So, Spencer, this is one of the big reasons that Lars and I have been talking about Damon Williams in this matchup. It's because of the mobility that he shows and the ability to create out of structure and the ability to escape the pocket with rushers in his face. We saw him do that multiple times in the second half against UCLA, where they got some good players in that defensive line as well. Watching Jay Toya, man, that dude can play. I'm a huge fan.
He was awesome.
Yeah. So I look at that where obviously, 1-2 players.
Can't wait for Oregon to get him in the portal this offseason.
All right, we're not going to go down that route.
I couldn't resist. So I'm sorry.
No, hey, I respect it. But to be fair, he was already in the portal once, chose to go back to UCLA for whatever reason. But outside of that, Damon's ability to create out of structure and make plays with his legs is honestly one of the biggest things that I think about in this game, and why Lars and I have leaned towards him potentially starting in this game, is just finding ways to look at a negative play and say, let's at least get it back to the line of scrimmage. Let's not fall behind the sticks, or, behind an offensive line that has allowed 24 sacks this season and has been prone to get behind the sticks. And then once this Washington team is behind the sticks, drives have effectively been ended. I don't have any numbers to back that up in terms of how often that happens, but trust me when I say it's very, very high. So that's one thing that I really wanted to make sure we emphasize there. But Spencer, it's time for us to flip the script a little bit here. One question that was posed by somebody.
I have one more question. I have one more question. Then I promise we will flip in segment number 3. But the question is for Lars, and that's, how has Washington been defending the run this year from what you guys have seen? Because Oregon this season, I think, has done a fine job running the football. Jordan James is over 1,000 yards. Noah Whittington, as the backup running back, has been hit and miss. Like, James is the clear number 1 guy. He's doing well. But there are not a lot of, 150, 175-yard games. Like, the running game keeps defenses honest for Oregon, but it doesn't carry the offense down the field very often. And if you take that away, that puts a lot on Dillon Gabriel's shoulders. So what do you feel like Washington is capable of defending the run this year?
It's kind of a mixed bag, because against USC in that third quarter, that's how they came back in the game, was running the ball. And there was massive. We're talking, I think it was a 12-yard carry, a 13-yard carry, and a 14-yard carry for USC in consecutive plays. And then you go stretch that 2 or 3 drives. The only difference was Lincoln Riley and no other offensive coordinator aside from whoever Kirk Ferentz hired to replace his son in Iowa ended up doing. And unless you have Caleb Johnson, which, again, I love Jordan James, and I think he'll actually probably be a decent – he is a great back. And do we get 22, Whittington, or do we get 23, or do we get 24? Because, again, 22 has the slip on 4th down, is what it is. Sorry, Oregon fans, that bring up some memory there. But, the combination of Jordan James and Noah Whittington, to me, I think if Will Stein commits to it, it could be dangerous, because Washington has been prone to missed tackles this season. They've been gashed a handful of times. I'm not saying it's going to be they're basically middle of the pack when it comes to running the ball. or run defense in that respect. So if you can find a way to commit to it a little more, I'd be curious to see how much you could gash them, because Washington and Ohio State have the exact same PFF coverage grade. So the difference might turn out to be the ground game, and I think that's where Washington could get exposed just a little bit.
Now we will flip the script after the break, and I will answer whatever questions these guys have for me about Oregon going into the game. We're getting to it all, and it's coming up next. All right, fellas, fire away. Biggest questions for Oregon. I'm here to answer. I'm an open book, as long as nothing comes up about the last 3 matchups.
Oh, well, actually, that's exactly where I have to go with this.
That's
first
it.
question.
Roman's out. Roman's done. Like, well, I didn't have anything else.
Spencer, this question actually does come courtesy of one of our everydayers, where it needs to be mentioned. This is the 3rd time in the last 4 matchups that Oregon is favored by double digits. I have to remind you that Dan Lanning lost.
Not technically.
Oh, was it 9.5 in the Pac-12 championship game? All right, but the question still stands.
That's why I said
Dan
not
Lanning
technically.
Yeah, I know. Dan Lanning has coached like it, or coached, just, hey, yeah, I'm overconfident. I'm going forward on 4th down in situations where he doesn't necessarily have to. And this year, being such big favorites, Washington's team is what it is. We know that Oregon has an advantage, especially when you look at the trenches, because they've shown it all season long. They are the nation's last remaining undefeated team. We understand all of those things. But at the same point, Dan Lanning has not beaten Washington yet. What does he have to do differently in this game to get over the hump?
I think it's get off to a strong start and keep the crowd in it. Like, whether Lanning would admit it or not, it has to be on his mind. It has to eat away at him that he's 0-3 with a trio of 3-point losses to Washington here. Whoever's on the other side as a head coach or as a player, you're playing the same logo. The uniform colors are mostly the same. I hope you guys bust out those black helmets, by the way. Please bring them out. They're so good. They're so phenomenal. Even Oregon fans all over Twitter were like, okay, these are awesome because they were great. But I think for Dan Lanning, it's getting his team healthy, number one, but getting them back to playing the style of football they were for most of this season. But against Maryland and Wisconsin, they stumbled a bit. And they almost lost against Wisconsin because it was a better team and it was on the road. But they didn't play great the week prior. Now, Oregon's had the sort of season where they don't play great. They're playing a team like Maryland. They win the game by 21 points. But they weren't great on 3rd down. They had 12 penalties, 6 of which led to Maryland first downs and led to 10 points they might not otherwise have had in the ball game, and they still won at 39-18. So I think that's where Oregon's mindset tends to be. From what we see on Ducks versus them, that's where Dan Lanning wants his team's heads to be, is, hey, we're focused on us. It's Oregon versus Oregon every single week. If they get to that, then Washington can't keep up, because this is an Oregon defense that is really, really good. And if the offense off a bye week with Tez Johnson back gets its footing again, and if the offensive line has a little bit more punch, a little bit more pop in the run game, then I think they'll be able to move the football enough. But I think this Oregon defense is going to create problems for whichever Washington quarterback is playing. But it starts with that mentality of, hey, don't let the tension build amongst the fans at Autzen of, oh my gosh, are we doing this with Washington again? Oh my God, can you please just beat Washington? No matter how good the Huskies are, there are a lot of Oregon fans, myself included, that just beat Washington. Just do it. There's something about it. Everything favors Oregon in the spot. So I think it's a mentality thing, and he's been really good with that, and it's why I feel good going into this game.
All right, Spence, so I'll be honest. I watched the Ohio State Oregon game in my hotel in Omaha after I came back from the Iowa game. So
10 out of 10 game. 5 stars. Would recommend. Would do again. Will do again.
Yeah, that clock management was immaculate. I will say that. Explain to me, though, the game before that. I'm looking at Dillon Gabriel's stats. One of his worst PFF games this season against Michigan State.
Yep.
Throws 2 picks, but yet the final score is 31-10. I guess take for Washington fans, for us, if you could, how did Oregon overcome a terrible Dillon Gabriel game to make it more than a 2-possession game at the end?
The starters did not allow an offensive touchdown. Once the second unit got in defensively, Michigan State went down the field and scored with most of their starters still on the field. That was it. And there was a sequence early. Michigan State converted a 4th down. Childs made a great throw. It was a smart play call from our old friend Jonathan Smith of the Pac-12, RIP. And then they got down to the 2-yard line. Childs fumbled. And after that drive, I remember watching that game, and after they fumbled there, I said out loud to myself, there's no one around to prove it, so you'll just have to take my word. But I said, they're not going to score a touchdown. They're just not. And that's how it played out. And this Oregon defense has been able to bail out the Ducks in a couple spots where the offense has been just okay. And you think about, crazy enough, the Idaho game. The offense couldn't get down the field, couldn't execute. And the defense came up with a couple of big stops. And against Boise State, the offense was fumbling the ball around. Defense made a couple of big stops, even though they didn't have their best day. But in those games where Oregon has struggled, Dillon Gabriel is not protecting the ball in the red zone. It's not he's at the 35, he takes a shot down the field and it's intercepted. No, that happened once against Illinois. The red zone interceptions have been the biggest problem for Oregon's offense this year. So if they stay out of their own way, if they don't commit penalties, if they don't commit silly turnovers, and they were all throws that you would think Damon Williams would make as a first-year starter, not Dillon Gabriel as a 6th-year starter. But he's just had some head-scratching moments, and it went away after the Michigan State game. And after that, Oregon was steamrolling. Beat Michigan on the road by 21, beat Ohio State, crushed Illinois, who's a top 25 team. They had a wild game last week, if you didn't know. Wild. You guys see what happened in that game?
A little bit.
Craziness. So Rutgers called a timeout. Illinois missed the game-winning 58-yard field goal. After the timeout, Illinois decides to go for it, and they throw a 50-yard touchdown. Poor Rutgers. But Illinois is a solid team, and Oregon blitzed them from the start. It was just never close. When they stay away from those self-inflicted wounds, something I think you guys are probably very familiar with, the Oregon offense is really, really good.
Yeah, it certainly has been. So that's kind of where my next question leads, where we started the show with Washington's defense versus Oregon's offense. I want to go back there and kind of, for all our YouTube viewers, the third point we have here on our little segment outline, matchups that decide the game. When I look at tight end specifically, Terrence Ferguson has had a really solid season.
Yep.
But I really like what Washington's linebackers have done in coverage, partially thanks to Steve Belichick, partially thanks to the safeties helping too, and just the way Steve Belichick is able to just kind of format the back end of the defense. Because he's been a weapon, especially in the red zone, do you feel that's something where you're really confident in his ability to get open against what this Washington defense has shown on the back end? Or do you think that's something where you might have to rely a little bit more on whether it be, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, or even Trayshawn Holden?
Yeah, I think they've been really clever offensively. And Roman, I talked to our guy Jake Butt ahead of the Oregon-Maryland game because he was calling it on the Big Ten Network. And he's awesome. And what he told me was he feels like watching Oregon's offense that he never knows where the football is going. And that's the best way to describe it. Like, yes, Tez Johnson is the leading receiver. He has had games with, I think he had against Boise State when Oregon scored 37 points. He had one catch for -2 yards. Like he legitimately wasn't involved. Evan Stewart was the wide receiver hero against Ohio State. He has had 3 catch for 15-yard games routinely. He's had like 6 games under 30 yards. So if the linebackers match up well with the tight ends, and they're not always going to be guarding the tight ends, then you're going to have a lot of different weapons for Dillon Gabriel to throw the football to. So if Terrence Ferguson, sorry, my dad's laptop was buzzing. If Terrence Ferguson,
you're getting a Skype call there.
Yeah, if Terrence Ferguson is taken away, I'm not overly concerned. Like, yes, T. Ferg is great. You want to get him involved if you can. Oregon uses tight end screens as well as any team in college football. You will definitely see that this year. But you will see Kenny and Sadiq matched up with corners on the outside or safeties in the slot if a linebacker takes away Terrence Ferguson, because they can move both those guys around, but especially Sadiq, who is just a freak of nature.
So, sorry, Lars, one thing I want to get in there that I think that's really interesting is I'm just curious to see how Washington's going to handle that, because we've seen Washington match up with some top-tier tight ends this year, and the matchup I point to specifically is Colson Loveland. When Michigan came up to Washington, they did a really good job isolating Cameron Fabiculana at safety on him and just saying, we trust you in man coverage to go win those battles. So that's just something I'm really curious to see how that gets played out this coming weekend.
Yeah, and I think if they do that, that opens up the outside. If you take a safety down out of the back end and play what Steve Belichick likes to do, which is a lot of single high, you're going to leave a one-on-one somewhere. Whether that's Evan Stewart this side or Trayshawn Holden or Tez Johnson on the other side, someone gets a one-on-one, and Oregon has been willing to take those shots, but you'll see plenty of clever and creative screen game, RPO sorts of looks from Will Stein. But as they showed against Ohio State, if you leave 1v1, he'll take a deep shot, particularly to Evan Stewart.
I'll make it the last question. What's Atticus Sappington's range this season? I'm not going to talk
45 and in. About 45 and in. He just had his best game ever as a Duck. 3 for 3 on field goals, on the road, in the wind, in the cold, hostile environment. He was the offensive MVP, even more, I think, than Jordan James. I mean, James scored 6 points. Sappington scored 10. And it was a big, big day for him. And, if Oregon gets into a 50-yard field goal range or outside of 45, they'll turn to Andrew Boyle, who's got a bigger leg. But right now, I talked about it last week, 40 yards and in, Oregon fans have got supreme confidence, and they should, because Sappington is kicking really, really well. And that's something that unfortunately came into play last year. If all goes right for Oregon, though, Atticus Sappington is not a player that is important in this game. That's the way it should work out, but hey, it's a rivalry, so you absolutely never know. Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, Lars Hanson as well. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. This has been a Locked On crossover. We appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.